Great, thank you everyone. We are right at the top of the hour, so good afternoon and thank you for joining us today and welcome to our webinar, Mastering Supply Chain Optimization in an Ever-Changing World. I'm Cody Smith, your moderator for today's session. Before we begin, let me introduce our esteemed speakers who will guide us through this transformative journey. Joining us today is Harsh Coppola, the COO and co-founder of Tada, a trailblazing leader in supply chain and business management. Harsh brings a wealth of experience and expertise in streamlining operations and implementing innovation solutions to drive excellence. We're also honored to have Marty Thomas, the former Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy and Operations from Fortune Brands and Rockwell Automation. Marty's extensive career in the industry has made him a renowned expert in navigating complex supply chain transformations and adapting strategies to a dynamic marketplace. Together, Harsh and Marty will share their firsthand knowledge, insights, and practical advice on how to optimize your supply chain operations and stay ahead of the curve. During this webinar, you'll have the opportunity to learn about Tada's powerful digital duplicate and its potential to revolutionize your supply chain processes. Additionally, we have dedicated a significant portion of our agenda to a live Q&A session where you can engage with our esteemed speakers and get answers to your questions. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit your questions using the Go-To question panel on your screen, and we'll address as many as possible during the Q&A sessions. So once again, thank you for joining us today. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Harsh to begin our feature presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining. We're very excited about sharing some thoughts and ideas with you, and I am, of course, absolutely delighted to see that Marty has been able to join us. Marty, you've run some of the most complex supply chains in the world, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear your thoughts. And so we're going to do a little bit of a setup and then get into a discussion about them. I don't need to tell all of you that the world has changed pretty substantially. The number of changes that supply chain leaders have to deal with just continue to go up. What you see on the screen is just an example of the trend lines as far as climate effects and the disruptions that they cause. It is going up an exponential curve, and by judging by the news, it's not the end of the curve. It just continues to go up. And those are not the only disruptions that supply chains face. There's geopolitical risk, there is trade barriers, there's all kinds of other issues that impact supply chains in a very big way. And they seem to be getting more frequent and more severe. And what that means is that supply chain teams must really understand the impact of disruptions and be able to shift and execute in real time. Now, if we can go to the next slide. So the supply chain problem that businesses face are clear to all of us who work in supply chains. Disconnected data, disconnected processes, disconnected partners who are very important to the functioning of the supply chain, disconnected decisions. And what it brings up are some very significant challenges. People have very limited visibility. They're not able to make decisions based on very limited information or late signals. Decisions become suboptimal and the operations become unstable. And that costs businesses a lot of money. And this has a lot of implications. So the question we asked ourselves is, why is this situation there today? And a significant part of the reason, not all of it, is that traditional solutions have been far too slow to respond and adapt. And they're very rigid and very silent. And so what is really needed is the kind of capability that gives supply chain leaders ultimate command of the supply network. And this is kind of what we're going to be talking about and drilling into. So what Tada does is actually we created a platform that is ready for the future that you face. And unlike companies that start with and businesses that start with data, we thought it would actually be better if we start with what we call the digital DNA of a business and its network. So what we do to start with is to build that digital DNA of a company. And then once we have done that in a way that it reflects the strategy of the business, the structure of the business rules that you operate by, the partners that you work with, your footprint, we then bind that DNA the disparate data that a company has across many ERP and legacy systems and spreadsheets and all those kinds of things. And then we blast it out in the form of applications which are custom built to your DNA so that your people can solve problems. Now, what you're all dealing with is you have many, many processes in your extended supply chain. And you have an alphabet soup of systems that you operate on. Now, what you need is something that provides you some advanced capabilities as you get beyond even the base requirement that every business leader talks to us about, which is, I just need to get visibility. And that will allow me to allow my people, both within the organization and at partners, to be able to look at the same information at the same time and be able to think about it and say, what are my options? What can I do? And they have to make decisions in real time by understanding the impact of those decisions and the impact of disruptions that take place across your network, and create a continuous learning cycle where you're able to learn and write back to the systems that you have. So this is the kind of challenge that companies face. And this is really what Tada is there to take care of for you. Now, if you go to the next slide, Cody, fortunately, the platform that we built that is being used by very complex supply chains has been recognized by people like Gartner and many others as being a technology and a capability that is 5 years ahead of anything else that's out there. And it has at its core a composite digital twin that everything is built on. If you can go to the next slide. So that actually brings us full circle to a discussion that we would like to have. So Marty, over the last 5 years, can you talk about, based on the last 5 years, can you talk about the changes that supply chains are trying to react to today?
Yeah, thanks, Harsh, and thanks for everyone for joining. It's a huge question when I try to look back over the last 5 years and put it in perspective of 42 years of working in supply chains, and the last 5 are like nothing I've seen in the 37 previous, and I think they're a preview of what we're going to see going into the future. The change is so huge, I try to break it into 3 pieces. Number 1 are external forces that all of our supply chains that have to deal with, and even then you can break that down into some big pieces. Start with geopolitical risk, and start with whenever we launched the massive tariffs in the 2018-2019 timeframe, and you're a supply chain leader, and overnight your cost structure just went up by 25%. The amount of change that required companies to make, businesses to make, not just supply chain, people had to redesign their products, the marketing teams had to do things, sales had to do things, all just to be able to do business in this new tariff intensified world. On the other end of geopolitical risk that we're dealing with today is, when honestly everybody doesn't know what's going to happen between China and Taiwan. We survived the China-Hong Kong situation. Now, will there be an invasion? Will there not be an invasion? We have the wars in Europe going on. And the question is, what's the implications of that on the supply chain? And I can tell you what's happening. People are starting to pull their work out of Asia and getting it back in the North American continent because they can no longer take the risk of the Pacific Ocean and the amount of time lag between your suppliers and where you are today. And that change is not ending anytime soon. Then you look at capacity constraints. Our suppliers around the world are all working at maximum steady state output. So any surge in demand from the market can no longer be met because they're all already running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can then go look at the logistics channel. COVID magnified this issue and showed it to us. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the ocean or whether you're talking about the rail or whether you're talking about over the road. We've all spent the last 3 years of our lives changing carriers, changing routes, changing our entire logistics structure. In the past, you could have gone from Guangzhou to LA to truck. Today, you may now have to take those ships from Asia all the way around to the East Coast, put it on a rail back the other way, all just trying to get your freight to where you need it to go to. And then lastly, on the external, it's changing consumer demands to consumer wants on a variety of things that we have to deal with today. In the past, design teams could launch new products and sell those products for 2 to 3 years. Today, consumers' preferences are changing on an annual basis. So that means a new design comes out annually versus every 3 years. That means the sourcing team and the manufacturing teams are constantly having to retool, find new suppliers, renegotiate everything they have. Consumers' demand has been crazy. It's been going all over the place. We all watched the COVID upswing, whatever your business particular upswing was. And many of us now are watching the bullwhip crack and tremendous reduction in demand occurring as fast as the increase happened. All of that just causing tremendous challenges across the entire thing. I think then you have to look internal. You have to look at our own internals, our own factories, our own warehouses, our own materials teams, sourcing teams, and there's just no way to argue about it. There's been a tremendous talent loss across the supply chain. We've lost the critical skills. We've lost a lot of that critical mass of people who knew how to run the systems. All of that makes it very difficult for supply chain leaders to gain agreement at the C-suite on exactly what are the issues and gain agreement on making a decision to have us go forward, which makes the whole thing very, very difficult. If you could slide that back up, Zach, for me. So with that, do you want to go ahead and then last, I'd say, is COVID. I don't believe people can convince themselves or should convince themselves that COVID was the cause of what we saw. I would argue, and many of my peers would argue, that the supply chain was fragile. It was barely treading water before COVID happened. What COVID did was magnify the situation and took a supply chain that was barely functioning and broke it. But I don't believe when COVID goes away, when we finally get the end of it, that all of the issues we've seen in the last 5 years go away. I think they are here for the rest of the time.
That's great insights, Marty. You know, companies are struggling to deal with it, but my question to you, if you could maybe tell the audience how you think companies are prepared to deal with those changes today, or if not.
We'll do a poll question.
Oh, sorry, thank you. I think this might be a good chance to go to a polling question, and so I'm going to turn it over to Cody. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just want to get everyone's insight this afternoon. Which of the following is driving your business the most? And go ahead and select one. We'll leave the poll open for a little bit longer. So geopolitical risk, supply capacity and availability, lack of visibility to demand shifts, supply chain lead times, or changes to consumers' purchasing behavior. So we'll leave this open just for a couple more seconds and get everybody's input. And then I'll share the results. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Thank you for participating. Harsh, Marty, let me go ahead and share these results for you. These are great. Thanks, everyone.
That's interesting. Supply capacity and availability, but even more than that, lack of visibility of demand shifts and supply chain lead times is what the audience is pointing to, Marty.
Yeah, it's quite honestly what I was thinking is how it's going to turn out. It came very, very close. I mean, demand is changing so fast today, and our supply chain lead times have gone from 6 weeks out of Asia to 26 weeks back to 13 weeks. The stress that puts on the system for our supply chain leaders to be able to change their orders profile on their suppliers 26 weeks out is becoming unbelievably difficult. And it's great to see them that. This leads us right into where we need to go. How do we increase the visibility across that supply chain so people can actually see how are my suppliers actually performing?
Right.
You know, where are they performance of their schedule versus today we just don't know.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the preparedness that companies have to deal with all of these changes that you've been talking about and what the audience is telling us?
Yeah, and I think the audience is going to tell us the same thing a little bit later, but there's a wide variety of preparedness across all of the companies in the US, Europe, Asia, wherever you want to talk about. There are companies to the far extreme that have actually gone through a complete digital transformation and are seeing the benefits of that transformation. I think there's companies that have determined they need to do the transformation and they're in the process of taking it on. And I think there's companies out there that are doing spot installations, spot apps in functional specific areas. They may be doing a digitization effort in sourcing. They may be doing one in materials planning. They may be doing one in logistics or warehousing. I think unfortunately the far majority of the companies out there are still doing business the way business has been done for a long time before this change started to come at us at an accelerated rate. And the reality is they're stuck with trying to buffer all these unknowns with inventory. And I think the point is becoming now the change is coming so fast. You used to be able to survive with buffering. I do not believe you're going to be able to survive as time goes on. Demand is changing too quick. Supplier preferences are changing too quick. Lead times are way too long. Change is happening so fast that if you don't find a way to increase your visibility across your entire supply chain so that everybody is looking at the same data at the same time live. And when I say everybody, I don't mean materials versus sourcing. I mean the sales force is seeing the same data that the supply chain is seeing. So that when the C-suite gets together to have discussions, everybody has the same sole source of the truth. Everybody is looking at the same information the same way, and you have a better chance of making a decision in a timely manner.
Great input, Marty. Why don't we go back to the audience and see about the next question? Cody?
Yeah, thank you, Harsh. So what is the key reason your people have difficulty making the decisions they need to? So everybody can take a time and just go ahead and select one. We'll leave the poll open for a little bit longer. So our options are they have to get the right information, inability to analyze data fast, gain fact-based consensus internally and with partner, ensure it meets business strategy and outcomes required, or do not understand true impact of changes taking place. Great, thank you everyone for voting. We'll leave this open just a couple seconds longer and then I'll share the results with you, Harsh and Marty. All right, wonderful. Thank you everyone for voting. I'm going to go ahead and close our poll. Right. Marty and Harsh, go ahead and share this with you. Oh, these are great answers. Thank you, everybody.
It's always very interesting to wait for the answers and see what the audience thinks. It looks like the top reason is the inability to analyze data quickly, followed by they have to get the right information to start with. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think you take a look at it, and if you're a materials planner today and you're working in your system, how many materials planners out there are working with the lead times that are the contractual lead times when the fact is the suppliers are running 50% longer lead times and we're planning with what's based in the contract? How many times do we go into an S&OP meeting and there is a 30% difference between marketing, sales, and supply chain and what we think future demand is? And the reality is no one's looking at the data the same. It takes too long to get the data, and when it does, everybody has a disparate opinion on what it is.
Right.
I mean, great answers.
Terrific. Now, the other thing that we maybe should talk about is that the world is getting faster and the risk is getting worse. Why is it so difficult to get supply chain digital transformation approved and implemented successfully?
You know, I've been reporting to boards now for 17 years, and I don't know how many board meetings I have sat through and how many executive annual planning sessions that I've sat through. But there's nothing that draws the same response from a board is that when you sit down in front of them to present, and the first line item on your chart has the word system in it or system change in there, you get pretty much that same reaction from them, one of fear or one of, oh no, that you get. And you really have to step back and ask yourself why. And I think one of the biggest reasons is there's none of us out there in today's world that haven't gone through a very difficult ERP implementation. And as we all know, ERP implementations on average probably take twice as long as you think they're going to take. They probably cost twice as much as you think they're going to take. And then when you look at what the benefits were that were put into the package that approved the ERP transition, those benefits aren't always what they're there. So when you go into the room, you're fighting just an absolute uphill battle. I think the other thing that people are worried about is when they've gone through them themselves is at times there's been pretty significant customer disruption. And I think they really have a hard time getting their head around, can we make this transition going forward? I think there's also a lack of consensus across the executive suite and at the board level on what the true issues are. And is this systems change going to attack what the true core problems are that you have there? You also compete for critical IT dollars. IT dollars are scarce. We all know ERP implementations are expensive and they've used up a lot of cash, and you have to go in there and do that. And then one of the other ones is you get yourselves into a competing downturn market right now, and people are starting to tighten their wallets. I will argue the reality is the good companies are taking advantage of a downturn right now. They're going to restructure their supply chains going forward because they know they absolutely have to do that. What's interesting is if you can ask a question back to senior management or to a senior management ask a question to the board, if you could wake up tomorrow and we have completed the system transition, do you think we'd be in a better place? And the answer is almost unanimously yes. So the question is, how can we take and help senior management and boards get over the fear of taking on another systems challenge? I think that's really what it is, Harsh, is we got to get them past. Everybody has gone through something in the past and known that there have been issues with it. But they do know we've got to make a transition. The world's so fast, we can't live with 26-week lead times. We got to have total visibility down to this tier 1, tier 2 suppliers so we really can plan the inventory appropriately. But how do we de-risk it? How do we make sure them that if you give us the funding, we can implement the project and we won't hurt the customer, it won't hurt the current quarter financials? I think that's the task at hand.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the world has changed so much, the old approaches don't quite work, and it's time for a new approach, a new capability, a new technology, or something that disrupts what people used to have to deal with before.
Yeah, and I don't think you can even buffer inventory anymore. We used to be able to get away with that in the past. And now the designs change so quickly that you can't continue to build out there like you used to. You really have to find a way to see where the market's going and be able to adjust your supply chain.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Now, when you actually get one approved,
Pull through.
thank you. Marty's keeping me honest. Maybe this is a good time to go to another question to the audience because your input is really very, very valuable. So, Cody?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Harsh. What is the biggest roadblock you have for supply chain digitization? So if the audience could go ahead and choose one. Our options are failed, too many ERP systems, lack of funding and a slowing economy, lack of consensus on what to do and where to start, management/board approval, or lack of talent. I'll leave this open for a couple more seconds and then I'll share the results. Great, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. Marty and Harsh, let me go ahead and share these results with you. These are interesting. I like it.
Okay, so number one reason is lack of consensus on what to do and where to start. That's kind of interesting. And sort of a distant seconds, failed or too many ERP systems, or getting management and board approval. Does any of that surprise you, Marty?
No, because I think they're all critical.
Yeah.
And I think that so many of us, every element of our supply chain needs to go through the transition. And how do you force rank things that need to be done in the factory versus in your logistics channel versus materials planning versus sourcing? Because all of them are consuming tremendous amount of hours today and a tremendous amount of waste because the processes just don't work.
And what was surprising to me is the last one, which is lack of talent, which I would have thought would have a greater prominence from the audience in the sense that there are many new people in the supply chain. And as supply chains are also shifting from, let's say, China to other places, there are new supply chains being set up, new people who have to deal with it and so on. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. As I look at it, we said pick one. And if we haven't started yet, we probably haven't run into the lack of talent issue yet. Could be another reason too, because if we're sitting there staring at it, knowing we have to do something, but it's so big, where do you start? You know, you may not have had a chance to experience what you're going to really run into when you go to make these changes. I don't know if that's true or false. It's just a way to look at it.
Great insight. So when you do get a digital transformation approved, what are best practices on implementations that make them successful?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I start off in these, I've done several of them now, and I start off with an incredibly simple set of questions. And the team asks every function in the company the same series of questions. What decisions do you have to make every day, once a day, once a week, once a month, once a quarter, or once a year? What are those decisions you have to make? And as you go to make them, where do you get the data to help you make that decision? How long does it take to get that data? How old is that data? And then ultimately, how do you get consensus around the decision, especially when it's cross-functional? And within cross-functional, especially whenever it's just out of supply chain, and you have to gain agreement between the sales force, the finance team, and the supply chain, how do you gain consensus? An example I use on a regular basis is a company came and asked me to work with them last year, and we're working on their S&OP process. And we were going through it, and they were on a 30-day S&OP rhythm. The only problem was it took about 60 days to make a decision out of the last S&OP meeting, and they were in a perpetual lack of decisions. So what did they do? They literally had to decouple the supply chain demand planning from what the sales force was saying they were going to sell, because they could never draw a consensus. The result of that is an ERP reschedule done through manual transactions, because it's no longer going to feed out of the sales forecast. Mm-hmm. So I think once you get these decisions that people have to make, you now have a framework as to where the issues are by function. You know what works well in the decision-making process, what doesn't work as well, and fundamentally what is absolutely broken. From there, I think you have to define the end state. You got to define the end state. You got to show the entire jigsaw puzzle with all the different pieces in there and gain agreement on when we complete the journey, what is this thing going to look at? Now you veer very differently from how an ERP transition takes place. Now you pick your fights very, very carefully, and you take that jigsaw puzzle, and now you can break it into pieces and decide which piece you're going to work on first and which piece you're going to work on last. The other major difference is you have to do this in an agile environment. You have to do it with sprint methodologies. You have to do it in 3-week sprints. You have to do it where at the end of every 3 weeks, you have real deliverables. You have a working piece of the transformation that if you decided to stop, it's a working piece that's going to add value to the company going forward. I don't recommend you stop, but if you do, you have to have it, versus the ERP is you got to go the whole way or nothing works. Mm-hmm. I think next is ownership. Way too often we have the supply chain looking at IT and we have IT looking at supply chain. To me, this is easy. Manufacturing has to own this, the supply chain has to own this, they got to bring IT on board with them, because it's got to be their system that solves their needs going forward. The last area for me is quite different than what our one poll result said, where they said talent was only 5% of their issue. I can tell you, I have personally run into culture and talent as one of the major roadblocks as we try to do these. People have been doing things the same way for a long time. And even if they want to agree with you, they got to make the transformation, you're going to really change their life. You're going to change everything they do and how they do it. That said, so when you pick your starting point, you got to find a function or a factory or a group that you know has the leadership in place that truly wants to make this change, is going to push for the change. Get that project done, get that stake in the ground, show the benefits to everybody, shine a spotlight on it, and now you start to create that magnetic pull so the other functions, the other factories, other parts of your supply chain start to line up and want to get in line and go. Make sense?
Absolutely. I think those are key ingredients for success.
You know, we've covered a lot so far. But the reality is in Tada, you've done quite a few of these transformations, and you've seen some of these work, and you've seen some of the resistance you give. Would you mind sharing with the group today some of the things that you have seen and how you've overcome them, and some of the results you've been able to drive?
Absolutely, Marty. So, you know, a lot of the things that you talked about are actually spot on. And when we started Tada, it was to actually address some of the issues that you talked about. Systems adoption within organizations takes a long time, and that delays the results, and businesses don't have time. Speed is the new oil. And as you rightly say, if you're not able to react to the market, you just need to react faster than your competition.
Right.
You don't need to be perfect. So what we said is that it's important for us to deliver, having worked in large, complex organizations across the planet, that it was very important to deliver a supply chain execution system where people can look at the information that they need to clearly understand what the impact is, not only of what's happening, but of the decisions that they make, and be able to then execute them in real time.
Mm-hmm.
At the core, it was very important for us to deliver this new composite digital twin that, as I said earlier, represents the strategy of the business. It represents the structure of your ecosystem, because every business is wired differently, has different people, different partners in it. And if you're not able to reflect that in a way that it truly represents how the business wants to work, you will not be able to accomplish that. The business needs to have a definition of all of the relationships that truly represents effectively the unique DNA and the way a company wants to compete in the market. And so that's what we actually put together first, and that becomes very powerful. Gartner says that this composite digital twin is at the core of any successful transformation for the future. And the reason that it is that when the market shifts or your strategy shifts, if you have to go rewire all the data manually, which is kind of how it happens today, all you do is you go change that DNA and all the data flows to the new structure, and they're able to operate literally the next morning with that. So it's a very powerful capability. The other thing that you said is also something very important to organizations. We actually do deliver it in 3-week sprints. But because of the nature of what we do, we're actually able to deliver an entire capability or an application, if you will, or a module to a company in about 12 weeks. So it's very fast. And that now becomes a critical success factor for businesses. So the ability to have that and also do it in the language of the business. What happens is, in the world that has existed so far, you need to learn the language of data. You know, it's not called your plant in Louisiana. It is a number. People have a hard time adapting to that because they use a language in supply chains. So what Tada does is does it in the language of the business, so adoption becomes much easier because people don't need to change anything. They just do it the way they always did, and they get the information they always needed. So these are just some different factors that we built into how we are able to do this, and it becomes very effective.
Excellent.
Does that help?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. So at this point, I think it'll be good, as Cody promised the audience, to give them an opportunity to ask questions. And so, Cody, can you maybe move into the Q&A and give the audience an opportunity to ask questions?
Yeah, actually, we have quite a few coming through, so we can get started if you want to.
Terrific.
That'd be great.
So there's an interesting question already from the audience. How do you balance constantly shifting supply and demand. If you have to make a trade-off, where do you take the risk, on the supply or the demand side?
Well, nobody wants to lose market share, right? And so, I've been a strong advocate throughout my whole career of going long. I would tell you during COVID, we didn't do this elegantly. We made the decision to go long very early. We decoupled our orders on our suppliers versus what the sales force said they were going to do. We went up a grotesque amount over top of the sales forecast, and we always erred on the side of taking care of our customers. That said, that's not an elegant decision, having to make that trade-off. What would have been better was having the ability for the sales force and the supply chain to be able to sit down in the room and run scenarios together that says, if the supply chain does this and the sales force does that, what is the result in customer service, what are the resulting revenues, and be able to run through live different scenarios, which we did not have the ability to do. We had the old school where commercial team would come in with their set of data, supply chain would come in with theirs. There'd be a fundamental disagreement, would go away for 2 to 3 weeks and try to gain consensus, ultimately just to decouple. I don't believe we can continue to do that. I think this constant supply, demand, up, down, who's right, who's wrong is here forever. And we have got to find a way to be able to do live scenario planning and bring together closer the demand capacity conversation. It'll never overlap, right? Let's be honest, it'll never overlap. But it's too far apart today, the way we live. But I've always erred on taking care of the customers, to answer the question directly.
Oh, terrific answer. I think that is what it's all about, taking care of the customer. So the next question maybe is a little bit more towards me, Marty. Talk more about how your platform helps synchronize S&OP demand and supply, but please jump in as well. So one of the fundamental things which causes difficulty is that, in our opinion, when people do not see the information which tells them what the disconnects are, and also what the data points them to in terms of the kind of decisions that will give them different scenarios. So one of the things that Tada also does, literally on the fly, is give people different scenarios to think about, because there's an infinite set of possibilities, but you want to narrow it down to 3 or 4. It's sort of like the story that you tell about a Waze map that says you want to get from here to there. You can go one of 3 different ways, or 4 or 5, and this is what each of them is going to mean to you.
Exactly.
And then you can make a decision. And that's what we do. And hopefully that's something that helps people. But any other thoughts on the topic?
No, I think that's pretty well said, personally. The criticality of it, I can't just overplay on, and we're going to come back over and over today on speed and agility. And we're all too slow today, all of us. And that's not the supply chain. It's not the business. It's not sales. It's the system together is too slow as the world has taken off. If you don't mind, as I was listening to you, I just was pondering that first question, because it's such a great question. And the reality is for supply chain leaders today, we don't get to choose. I have been teaching my whole life that supply chain leaders don't get to juggle one ball. They have got to juggle 5 balls simultaneously, and they don't get to pick which one falls on the floor. They got to make their productivity, they got to make their safety goals, they got to make their quality goals, they got to make their customer service goals, and they got to make cash. And so this whole process about how do you create a balanced scorecard, how do you get people to do their best at making all those goals simultaneously, versus that great first question of having to pick and choose.
Great. It's great that we have a very engaged audience, and there's so many people on the call.
Yeah.
And we have another good question that's come in. It's a good framework discussion of the issues, but what are the top 3 capabilities that you can do differently, that you maybe need to do differently?
Well, coming out of a transformed supply chain, coming out with end-to-end visibility, you now have the ability to plan your entire supply chain inventory in the aggregate, or multi-echelon, if you will, versus today, we're planning every single step of the supply chain independently. I think you have the chance to be faster. When the market moves, you can quickly move your planning parameters to wherever you need to go. You can use all of these new capabilities, so when you have to move a supplier, you can now plan the new supplier while you're ramping down the old supplier and do all your transition things. All those things that you did in the past that took 5 people sitting in a conference room trying to agree to something, now we now have the ability to have all of that work together and come up and give you the opportunities on what you should work on. I think today, ask yourself at your staff level, what % of their time are they reacting to something versus when are they driving something for the improvement going forward? I think if you start looking at it that way as well, and start to realize what % of the time are we placing and chasing, either in the plant or with a supplier or the logistics channel, versus taking all that time in working on ways to reduce cycle time, reduce cost, improve service, other things, I think you're going to find a tremendous amount of opportunity to do this.
Terrific. So the next question from the audience is, much of what has been discussed today is from an OEM perspective. What advice can you give a supplier trying to proactively address these issues for their OEM customers?
I'm sorry, I don't see a difference.
Okay.
You know, I think no matter where you are in the supply chain, let's just start with if you're already at the big box and you're a Target, a Home Depot, a Lowe's, or if you're an Amazon, or if you're a manufacturer, or if you're an OEM, or if you're a tier 3 supplier, everyone is in the middle of the supply chain reacting to their customer and reacting to their supply chain. And so I apologize if I'm missing the question a little bit, but to me, everybody has to get orders to fill. They have to place orders to help manufacture or buy the product they need and fulfill their customers. And so how you do it specifically may be slightly different because your lead times may be different, or you may be buying a product that was designed by somebody else. You don't own the bill of material. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're managing those same things with unknowns on the customer side. And today there's unknowns on your supplier side because you don't have visibility into them. And to me, it feels the same. Harsh, do you see it differently, or maybe I missed the question?
Well, maybe slightly differently, in the sense that if you are a supplier, you struggle with getting information on the shifts in demand. It comes to you often very late.
Correct.
When your lead times change, the OEM is not recognizing that those lead times have changed. It's still placing orders at what was maybe a shorter lead time, and your lead times have just gone out for all kinds of reasons that we've talked about earlier. So suppliers are looking for the ability to be able to collaborate with the OEM on real time, on demand, on supply, on lead times, capacity, and all of these things, because as you said, there are spikes and shifts that are taking place on the fly. And if there's too much latency and you don't get this information, then you do not have a good, effective supply chain.
So it comes back to
getting some transparency, getting some sharing of information in a collaborative manner in real time. Becomes very, very important. Would you agree?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay. So how would you help a manufacturer move away from predatory long lead time sourcing across the oceans, and why?
Oh boy, that is a huge initiative that many companies are taking on today, and including in my prior life up until retirement. You know, we faced into the fact that we actually started to talk about the Pacific Ocean as the issue, quite honestly, and the fact that no matter how well we do, we're still going to have 6 weeks between us and another mainland. And with Amazon making 2-day delivery look slow, how are we going to live with 6 weeks? And so we started down that path, as are many companies starting down that path, on having to localize our supply chain. One, you have to get agreement from your organization that you're going to do that, because that is a huge initiative. Number one, try to find suppliers today in North America that can do some of the work that's being done in other parts of the world. You're going to probably have to go out and actually develop the suppliers. Not every manufacturing process that's done overseas is available in North America or in Eastern Europe and other places. You may actually have to develop your suppliers. You may have to develop partnerships that today you have a pure sourcing relationship, but you may have to invest some of your own capital. But before all of that, you've got to gain agreement from your board down through your executive office that this is something you need to take on because you strongly believe that we can no longer take the risk of an Asia, whatever your lead time is, 13 to 26 weeks or worse. You can no longer take that risk. You got to gain that agreement to do it. But then you got to go on and actually start to find your suppliers. We have personally dedicated and built new manufacturing sourcing teams in the countries that we are moving to from Asia. We've had to actually go plant our own local teams there and make them full-time dedicated people to drive this. It couldn't be a part-time job. You couldn't have the current sourcing team, the current manufacturing team do this incremental. So we had to go in there and plant them in country with all local, national, who know the supply chain, know the rules, know the regulations, and can help get that done. Right? It's a huge initiative. One could argue if you haven't started, you could be late. You could be late because there is a tremendous pull back into North America, predominantly south of the border, and the supply chain is getting eaten up pretty quick.
Great, Marty. The next question comes from the audience and also says, can businesses meet the requirements of the next 5 years without connecting your supply chain end to end? What will it take?
Well, I don't know if it's a digital answer, can they or can they not? I can tell you every year that they don't do it, they're going to become more and more disadvantaged against every single one of their competitors. They're going to have a bigger time, harder time satisfying their end customer while satisfying the investors in their corporation. Because if you don't do it, you're going to suck up a lot of cash, a lot of capital, and you're going to have ledger problems with obsolete inventory on the back end as consumer demand shifts when you've gone out there and tried to buffer yourself with inventory. Is it 5 years when it's over? Who knows? Is it going to happen? It's going to happen. And you have to take the journey. I think the answer is absolutely yes. Because trust me, your competitors are going to do it. The other thing that I talk to a lot about with my peers and the boards that I've reported to is, you don't win in this game because there's nothing that you're going to do that your competition's not going to do. So it's a continual every year. How do you train harder than the next person and try to stay 1 year ahead of them, 1 cycle week ahead of them, 1 week faster than them, 2 points of fill rate faster than them, 1 point of productivity faster than them, because the reward is you get to do it again next year, right? But this isn't a one and done. That's the other thing that we have to think about is this digitization effort is, think about it as providing the data to feed your entire continuous improvement program. We've all gone through the Lean Six Sigma, the Black Belt programs, and run out of opportunities out there. I think you'll be surprised when you go through these and you find all of the areas where people are working on that are reactive versus proactive, and you turn that into projects, you're going to develop some productivity money out of that as well. But I can't claim it's 5 years. It's just not that digital.
But I think my view is that in having worked in many, many companies, that it is hard to accomplish the results that organizations are looking for without connecting it a little bit end to end. And the thing that people need to understand is that what used to be very, very hard to do is now possible because of the technologies that we've advanced, because of the capabilities that are there. It's not something to fear, like everybody in supply chain has woken up with this feeling of horror that things are not working out. It is really possible, but you have to, as Marty said, as you said, commit to the journey, bring your partners on board, draw some consensus, create that partnership between IT and the business, and just go at it.
How would you help? One of the early on questions was where to start. And I think people have some decisions to make there early on spot solutions
Mhm.
versus total end-to-end. Can you share some thoughts for people that are out there? Because there's people who are probably on the phone today that are purely in one function of supply chain. There's probably people up there that are probably chief supply chain officers who look at all it. Can you compare and contrast on, hey, I'm toying with this decision. You know, I can go and do 7 different spot applications, or I can go end to end. Can you add some color to that as to how you would think about that?
Absolutely. So this was actually, as we have been working with so many organizations, is a big requirement, which is you are in a particular function. You want to make sure that that function is providing the best value to the organization. Ideally, if you are able to assure the leadership and the board that you're doing it in a way in which it does not obsolete some of the things that you have, or it truncates what you're able to do next, or cause the next thing to become even more expensive and long, then you have something. And so one of the things that we were addressing, which we felt was important to address, is it possible to have a connected end-to-end capability? But you can start anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You can start with a spot capability that gives you the results that you need in the immediate term, while not losing the ability to kind of go extend that very, very rapidly. And so that would be the ideal situation. Can it be done? Now you can. You couldn't before. And if you do not also have it, going back to the question that was asked, if you do not have a connected network, it is really very hard to deal with the data problems that exist. The lack of data, the incorrectness of the data. You have no way of triangulating the information to know what information you need to be dealing with and fix. So a lot of things come together when you take this other approach, and I think it's worth trying for organizations.
Yeah, good, thanks. That question comes through multiple times.
Right. So we probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions if we can do them quick. What role does artificial intelligence and machine learning play, and how do you develop predictive models?
Yeah. So we're actually working on an example now for a potential client, helping them translate end customer behaviors to future orders on their supply chain in a variety of economic situations: a rising economy, a falling economy, a inventory ramp up period, a inventory down period, new product launches, working through cannibalization algorithms, and helping them. Versus today, they'll come in and the sales force says, we have a new product, we want to launch it, it's going to do this, but nobody wants to talk about the prior products out there. What's the cannibalization going to occur? And as you know, we're currently working with one company in particular. Hopefully we'll be landing with many other companies on the same thing, where we're taking the guesswork out of that future demand forecast, and really providing them with intelligence, which, by the way, continues to calibrate itself on a daily basis. So this algorithm doesn't have to go off and use 4 years of data to start, because if you do that, by the time you load 4 years of data, it's obsolete and you get to start over again. You can go in there and start at the algorithm, and the algorithm will start to calibrate itself immediately and learn very quickly over time and start to dial itself in and in and in and get better. Those are going to be the kinds of things that are going to feed the S&OP processes in the future. Those are going to be the kind of things that are going to help us with that great first question on balancing between demand versus capacity. Those are the ones that are going to not make that decision go away, but it's going to take the goalposts and bring them so much closer together that we're not talking about tens of millions of dollars of differences. We're talking about tolerances that we can live with on it. That's just one area that's going to be absolutely huge.
Right. So the audience is sending in a number of questions, Marty, which is great. When you have multi-tier suppliers, how can you best share information and align demand and supply signals across that ecosystem?
Do you want to take that?
Sure.
How'd you like that?
Absolutely. So this is a very, very real problem, right, across every supply chain. And the way I would frame it is this. You need to have, you see, if you traditionally think about many customers who came to us when COVID hit and they said, I'm running blind. I have suppliers who are falling down the job. I don't know whether the tier twos have risks that I don't know about because I don't even have real visibility to tier ones. And so one of the things that we said is, look, we'll help you set up a connected network, and then you'll be able to collaborate with them in real time across the network to understand their capacity constraints, where there's risk that suddenly pops up that they're not able to handle. Your supply is going to be shifting, and how do you mitigate against that? Now, when there's a lot happening simultaneously, you also want to have the ability to prioritize what you go after. There could be 1,000 things going on.
Mm-hmm.
You want to pay attention to the 5 things that impact the business the most and impact your customers the most. And so you want to be able to create that hierarchy and do it in real time. In order for you to do that, it is important to understand the impact of all of these changes in real time as well. And so if the network is able to recompute on the fly, you're able to say, if supplier in the second echelon, second tier, is not able to ship something or ship it short, what impact will it have on the tier 1? How does it flow to which of my factories, which of my products, and who are the customers who are going to be impacted? So that you can then quickly decide, oh, well, here are some options for me, and I'm going to collaborate with the supplier. The way things happen today is that it's often done on emails and phone calls and things with very disconnected information, and that creates a huge problem. So this is maybe an approach, but effective collaboration platforms where teams can come together and act in real time have simply been missing. And so that's one of the approaches that we would advocate very much.
So no matter the question, the answer comes back to, we got to get faster. We've got to be more agile. We have to be able to react, because the reality is consumers' demands are changing quicker. Their expectations are getting higher. When they place an order today, they want to know the status of the order from the moment they click enter till it shows up on their door. And the way we've done it in the past no longer works, because we need that visibility, no matter which way we look at it. So we're going back to the question on, are you going to be able to compete 5 years from now? I think we're convincing ourselves what that answer actually is. It's sooner or later you're going to get squeezed out if you can't adapt and be able to move your supply chain at the speed it needs. And at the same time, satisfy the customer with all of their wants and make your productivity numbers, your inventory numbers, your quality numbers, and your cash flow numbers simultaneously. There's only one way to do that, and it's to increase your visibility and automate your processes.
Right. So Marty, it's been a great discussion. Maybe it's time to wrap it up because we're probably getting to the end of our time. I want to thank you for your insights, tremendous. And I also want to thank all of you in the audience. Would love to obviously engage with you, but hopefully this has been helpful. Really appreciate you joining today, and we'll continue the conversation in another forum coming up soon.
And thank you very much for joining. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good day, everyone.